hasn't it? Today on Last Call Games, we're going to take a look at Virtua Fighter 3 Team Battle for the Sega Dreamcast. Now, the Virtua Fighter series is a pretty milestone series of fighting video games. The first real polygonal 3D series of games, or first game on the arcade machines. And then it was released on the Sega Saturn, I believe, and I know the 32X. And then sequel, Virtua Fighter 2, and I know came out on the Saturn. I also saw a release on the Sega Genesis, but it was less of a polygonal. It wasn't a polygonal game; it was a sprite-based 2D fighting game. But this is Virtua Fighter 3, and this is a home conversion of the Team Battle version of the game, which is an updated version. The original game was going to be released on the Saturn, but it was eventually cancelled to focus on the Dreamcast port. Then, now, what this brings obviously is the team battles aspect, where you pit 3 fighters against 3 fighters. It's not really that great, I'm not gonna lie. And the whole game is really kind of Virtua Fighter 4 and 5 on the PlayStation 2 and the Xbox 360 respectively, or PlayStation 3 for Virtua Fighter 5, are vastly improved. 3 is a little shallow. So let's take a look at some gameplay footage and we'll come back and give a final verdict. When you're asked about the Virtua Fighter series, you'll probably think of the super blocky characters from the first 2 games. That's a pretty fair association, since the series was groundbreaking in the early to mid-90s, and has kind of fallen off in importance since. I mean, the series is so fascinated with its own history that it even includes a video about the history in this title, which is only the midway point in the series so far. I already posted that entire video online earlier, and I'll link to that in the description. But regardless, while VF1 and 2 look very similar, Virtua Fighter 3 is a marked improvement visually from the earlier titles, taking full advantage of the Dreamcast's improved power for some fantastic looking stages and good looking characters. Though it could be argued that Dead or Alive 2 looked better on both fronts. The sound is alright. It's nothing too groundbreaking, but for an arcade conversion at the time, it's certainly acceptable. And the gameplay varies from intuitive to infuriating. The controls are properly mapped for the Dreamcast controller, which is something you can't say about other fighting games on the system. There's one button each for punch, kick, and guard, as well as a sidestep button, which is defaultly mapped to the B button. The triggers are used for rotating the camera, a process I didn't find myself needing all that often, as the automatic camera actually works fairly well. The controls are pretty responsive with not much lag, and the game doesn't use the analog stick at all, just the D-pad, so using an arcade stick is definitely possible. So that was the intuitive part. Now for the infuriating part. The game's AI is all over the board. Of course, if you're mainly doing 2-player, that's not important, but still. Usually the characters progress in difficulty from the first stage to the last, with the first few opponents being incredibly easy, and the last ones being obscenely difficult. But Virtua Fighter 3 has some characters that are pretty much overpowered, Kaje being the most infuriating example. Often while I'm trying to execute a combo or a throw, the computer would simply do a strike which cancels the move, or sidestepping, Well, just so much sidestepping. The cheapness and variance of the AI really enraged me to the point where I didn't want to continue playing the game, which is something you don't want to hear about your video game. Though, when you do connect, and you do get to knock down an opponent, you can execute my new favorite move ever. The Butt Slam! Butt Slam! Butt Slam! Okay, I'll stop. Butt Slam! I'm sorry, I just love that move. Okay, now I will really stop. There's only 3 modes, one of which is just a training mode for practice. Normal mode pits one fighter against a series of fighters and is aptly named because every fighting game has it. It's usually called something like either normal or arcade mode. Team Battle Mode, which is what the game is named for, pits teams of multiple opponents against each other. But unlike other games, neither player can switch characters on the fly. Interestingly, the number of characters on each team is determined by the number of rounds needed to win in the options. But there's no mention of that in the options. I only found that out because once I had accidentally not changed the option back to what I was going to earlier. Team Battle Mode is pretty forgettable and really pales in comparison to games like Marvel vs. Capcom 2, another team-based fighting game. Virtua Fighter 3 Team Battle lacks the depth found in other fighting games, with only 10 characters, 3 modes, and a handful of stages. Now, let's go back and wrap things up. So now that we've taken a look at the actual game itself, Virtua Fighter 3 TB is... it's described by others as kind of the red-headed stepchild in the family. It's the awkward middle entry in the series. Quite literally, since Sega hasn't come up with a Virtua Fighter 6 yet. I don't know if they will or not, but that's up to them. It's definitely a much better looking game than the first 2 games in the series. And it does add some new features that are very useful. But it really lacks the depth that you would have expected in a game by this standard. If you compare this to, like, say, Dead or Alive 2, which was also on the Dreamcast, Dead or Alive 2 had these interesting story elements, it had more modes, the fighters were less... The fighters in Virtua Fighter, I think you could say this for the whole series, are kind of a little bit bland and generic compared to the fighters in Dead or Alive, and it's not just the boobs. Not just the boobs. But, so taking all that into consideration, I'd say after like the first half hour or hour, I would probably give the game an 8, but then it started really getting cheap and annoying. So, that's why Virtua Fighter 3 Team Battle on the Sega Dreamcast gets a 7 out of 10 from Last Call Games. Now, stay tuned, and hopefully very soon, we're going to be reviewing a movie-based game. Fun. And it lives up to every expectation of a movie-based game. So, we'll see you next time on Last Call Games. Ducks. Redux. Ducks. Redux. Ducks. Redux. Today on take 3. Today on Virtua Fighter. Action!